Okay, hi everyone. I'm really happy to have Howard Krais on the podcast series today, and in some respects, this is very much a follow up from our last podcast that we did with Mark Wright on banking, because Howard has worked in banking in NatWest, but other things as well in 1990. So this will be really interesting as kind of a follow on, which we haven't done before on the podcast series before. So let me just introduce Howard to you. So Howard has a long history in internal comms of over 30 years. He's worked in senior global senior positions in global change, communications and engagement roles at businesses which include NatWest, Eversheds, Ernst& Young, GlaxoSmithKline, and lately Johnson Matthey. He co-founded True with partner Anne-Marie Blake in early 2023. This consultancy was set up with the principle of helping organisations manage change, particularly taking a people-centred approach to change, which entails delivering change with employees rather than to them. And in recent years, Howard's become very well known within the field for his work on emphasising the importance of organisations listening to employees. And he's published with Mike Pounsford and Kevin Ruck the book Leading the Listening Organisation in 2023, which, may I say, is an excellent book. And I strongly recommend anybody to read that. Really, really interesting stuff. And recently, this year, many congratulations, Howard was awarded fellowship at the Institute of Internal Communications and also the Centre for Strategic Fellowship at the Centre for Strategic Communications Excellence in 2025. All right, so let's kick off. Howard, I'm going to dive straight into banking. Can you tell me about your experience working in NatWest in the 1990s?
Yeah, so hi, Michael, nice to be here. And yes, a long time ago, but some of the memories still seem and quite fresh. And it was really interesting listening to Mark last week because it rekindled a lot of thoughts from that time. And it was a time I think of like, you were just going into this, it's like the Wild West, you're going into this sort of new world of what we could do. And there wasn't, a lot of the discussions and challenges that we have today certainly weren't there then. I think we had some ideas about what could be good and what we might do. And we're able to go after them and deliver on them. So for me personally, I started at NatWest 1989, I think. I came out of university, went on a graduate scheme, knew that I didn't really want to do banking as such. And so from that, I got into marketing, and then from marketing into, I guess, what we today call transformation and change. But it was badged as something different. And then I had an opportunity to get into communicating that change. And so I took that, and I was given, even though I had no experience, I was given responsibility for the bank's video production, and you talked a lot with Mark about video,
yeah.
But also the major feedback channel at the time, which I think is where I can trace my beliefs and interests in listening right from that early stage, and we can get into that. The one thing I'd say as well, just as introductions, I think one of the things that the bank did before my time, so I don't take any credit for this, but just before I joined the team, was that they made this big decision to shut the branches, and in those days we had a lot of branches, 2,500 more, on a Wednesday morning between 9 and 9:30, and so that the transformation was all about the customer. And at the same time, we closed the branches from the customer so that the branches could have this dedicated communications time. That was what it was closed to do, so that people would get together as a group. And in those early days, and when I joined the team, video played a big part of that. We had what I might consider now to be a fairly old-fashioned magazine type program, which was, I think, every 6 or 8 weeks, and we as the centre were providing content most weeks. Maybe I'm going to, off the top of my head, suggest maybe sort of 9 out of every 10 weeks there would be something from the centre to be discussed, to be shared in that session. Because people, this was completely new, the idea of actually bringing this whole team together on a regular basis. And we felt, I think, at the time that we needed to help them to be able to do that. One of the most interesting things, and something I think you still see today, is the more that people did it, the more they craved that time for their own purposes. They said, we need less stuff from the center and we want more control of that time. And so we would do less videos or less written stuff that would go to them every single week. And as time went on, instead of 9 out of 10, maybe it then became 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 and so on. So because they really saw the value of having that time together and sharing whatever was important to them. So that was great. As I say, I was given this sort of responsibility for video. So that was the regular magazine program. It was ad hoc videos. It was included changing. Mark talked about U-matic videos, the old industrial standard U-matics, and moving from them to VHS, and just purely economically, it made a lot of sense. And so that was just doing project management of this huge practical move of, I don't know, as I say, 2,500 branches, removing the old kit, bringing in new kit.
Yeah. Huge.
The video was a big part, and we would work. We worked with Imagination, one of the top agencies in London initially, and we had a number of video suppliers that we were using. And as I say, feedback, and the feedback was really interesting because basically what we had was something we called the hotline, and it's very basic in that there was a phone number, a landline, obviously, no mobile phones in those days. And we recorded the chief executive, who's a guy, I think his name was Martin Gray. We recorded him doing a message, and the promise was that you phoned in with your question or your comment, and that someone responsible for that issue or area would respond to you in, I don't know, maybe 48 hours or 2 business days or something like that. And it worked pretty well. It was a good number of calls.
Incredible.
It was, and to the point where 1 year, because the bank was in its pay round, the unions were involved, and I think the unions saw that this was a trusted channel, and therefore they said to their members, phone the hotline, make your comment known. We had, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 calls that weekend, and it just showed that, clearly we were doing something right, that even the union felt this was a channel that should be used to sort of make their views known, make their protest about the pay deal. And well, that caused us weekend working and all sorts, just to try and make sure we were able to respond to people and didn't, ignore it. But it was great because, you had this promise and you had to keep it, which was to get someone to have a conversation. So we were doing listening in a very basic form, right back there in the mid 1990s.
And yeah, I mean, I'd like to pick up on that, just a couple of things there, because all of this is really fascinating. I think this thing with listening is really interesting. This phone in, it's interesting actually, because last week I was at the BBC archives and they actually had this was in the 70s. You could phone up and listen. There was like a little telephone news service. And it was like, I think they called it the Telephone Gazette. But obviously they didn't answer you back. So the idea of phoning in, went back 20 years earlier. But what you're talking about is two-way communication, right? You phone in and had this been done before? This is quite incredible.
Not to my knowledge. I mean,
no, we haven't come across this.
We built on it as well. I remember one time, and I only think we did this specific thing one time, is we got the chief exec to go into a studio, like phone. It was and we basically had a live phone in with him. So we had people. So I suppose in more recent years you got things like Yam Jams and the different ways that you can connect people up. Again, in those days we didn't have anything like that. So what we had was we had Martin in the studio with basically a switchboard and people calling in and him taking calls live, and we recorded it and we played it back. So again, the idea of two-way communication, of people being able to ask their questions. And just we had this opportunity. This is what I meant at the beginning about almost like pathfinding, doing things that had never been done before. We had a good idea and we got the support to be able to do it, which was which was fantastic.
That's incredible. When was this where you had this
So
Q&A? And not
I
when about would this have been?
this would have been mid-90s. So I left
90s.
NatWest. I would have left NatWest 96. So probably somewhere between 94, 95, 96,
That's
around that
excellent.
time.
And so again, because all of this is absolutely fascinating. So communicating again, there's change going on in the bank, and from what we've seen, we saw this with Mark in the previous podcast, that the banks in the 80s and 90s, I know, and I think even in the 70s, were going through major change. A lot of this was because of technology. Is that right? Things like ATMs, telephone banking, banks were becoming much more market customer focused. I mean, were these changes continuing into the 90s, or were they changing?
Yeah.
What were the changes you had in the
Well, I think
90s in the banks?
that when I refer to like the change, the transformation, which we'd call it these days, I mean, I got into that environment. I didn't know what I was going into.
Mm,
Um, the role I got initially was around helping redefine how the bank measured its own performance, because historically, what it had done was, in essence, say, what did we do last year? And we had 10% type thing. So you're looking behind you and then just adding a bit for the next year. And what it started to do, we use something which is, again, old hat today, but we use something called the balanced scorecard. So we started to say there are different forces which impact on our business, and for us to be successful, not good enough just looking in the what you achieved last year. So
yes.
you looked at your customers, you looked at your your key processes, you looked at your people, you looked at these different quadrants, and you said, have we got the right measures, have we got the right things that we're doing? So we're beginning to look forward rather than look backwards, and set measures around how we need to be in the future rather than just what we did in the past. So
Fascinating.
people became part of that. So whether it was through surveys or whether it was through, whatever it was that we were doing, attrition rates, I don't know, how we might have measured that in those days. But yeah, people became part of that. But I think the big driver was customer. Customer was the big driver. I mean, so the marketing effort and the different customer segments, that was the real driver of that change. And that outward looking, trying to move from these sort of austere. I mean, the branch I worked in when I came out of university in Piccadilly, still there, I think, next to the big Waterstones today, it used to be Simpsons. But, in those days, it was a huge high ceilings, Victorian marble floors. It was
Mm,
90% of the big 120 plus people working there, and 90%, 80% of the floor space was for internal operation. Customers were really squeezed into this narrow area of austere, serious thing, with these bank tellers who had been, almost out Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins,
Mary
wasn't it?
Poppins.
And
Yeah, Mary
yeah,
Poppins. Yeah.
and so you absolutely could see, if you watch Mary Poppins, you can see that was walking into those bank halls, that was exactly how it was. And if you walk in there today, if it's still open, it's all plush furnishings and it's all mostly customer space. There's probably about 15, 20 people working there. All the back office stuff has been taken out, of course. And
Yes.
so it's a totally different world now, but it started in those days, definitely.
And that's that for me. And Mark spoke about this last week, and I think it is incredible with the transformation, because I think sometimes, and we're seeing this a bit at the moment. I think with AI is we focus too much on technology for transformation, but I think what was happening in the banks is there was this technological change, but it was also a change in the organization, the organizational culture to really a very from a more traditional background to much more of a marketing customer centric focus. Would that be true to say that
Yeah,
that banks became more customer focused and sales outlets rather than production outlets?
increasingly, absolutely, and begun, to have sales targets. And I think a lot of the internal communications that we were doing were explaining new products, or the changes that are happening in the customer space. So that was a way of, as we moved into this more customer centric world, the internal communications was important to try and explain how that was all going to fit together. So video was my bit, but there was obviously newsletters, and there were, like, what do I want to call them? Like, not exercises, but packs, manager packs, or whatever, going out on a regular basis, so that people had conversation topics. They had frequently asked questions. They had, support, so that they had a topic to discuss using. And if I say multimedia, I just mean different medias that were available to us. In a very pre-intranet sort of world.
What were those medias? Because that's interesting. Because I think, and again, I think that's really interesting because we, in I think in history and in IC, I think there is this kind of naive assumption that all of these changes happened because of the internet and digital comms, but it didn't. They were happening before that. Is that right? I think
totally.
the digital
Yeah.
just speedens up. But so what were the channels you were using before?
Well, I think video and print were the main, and events. That was the other big thing. So there was a big investment in bringing leaders together, sales conferences, different. So you had, I just remember in the team there was certainly one, if not two, people who were on events. I was on video and feedback, and then you'd had people on print and these packs and more sort of general comms stuff that was being done. So they would be the main things that we'd be that were available to.
Yeah. And just one last question with the banks, because I get my impression is that in the 80s and 90s, the banks were highly innovative in relation to internal comms. In a way, I think in the 70s it was kind of the state sector was, because they had these big public relations departments, and of course in the 70s they were huge organized, 500,000 people worked for the post office in the 70s. These were massive. So my sense was in the 70s it was the public sector, the railways, the post office, BBC. But in the 80s, 90s, and that ties with the Thatcherite movement. Would it be right to say that the banks were they kind of seen as being very innovative in relation to the internal comms?
Well, I think so. I can't because I only worked at NatWest for that period. I was there 7 years. It's hard. I can't speak for anyone else, but
no.
I feel that, just as I said, we were able to do the things that made sense to do. We had a great head of internal comms, a guy called Malcolm Groves, who was very, was a brilliant mind, and he really challenged you to think about why we're doing what we were doing, what the impact was. We had a lot of discussions about the best ways of doing things, and he gave you good air cover, good support, to try different things. We had an engaged senior leadership team, all going through this change, so that the comms was very much part of the change world. Loads of debates even today about where does comms sit and what function and what have you, and it was at that point it was all part of the big change that was happening. And so it was just an exciting time to where you could do some very different things, and the bank gave you that space to be able to really understand what you were doing.
It's really interesting and I think that's from a broader kind of strategic, organizational, or historical sense, the idea, I think that when you have big change, it unfreezes things, that you can do things that during settled periods, organizations tend to become more conservative. They don't like. And can you, so the broader thing is it's change, but is this change in relation to internal comms? Because my sense is, internal comms, you can put it in different places: HR, PR, marketing. Where's this change coming from at the bank? Was this more coming from a marketing stroke PR, or was it coming from a HR kind of?
I think at that time, it was, we've got all this change happening. We need to be sharing that with our people. If they don't understand it, we're not going to be able to deliver it. And so, it was driven, as I say, it was driven by the customer, the increasing customer centricity that was going on.
Yeah.
But it lived in this, there was it was this hidden, almost like a hidden function, because all it was called, if I remember rightly, it was called customer service. And I didn't, when I applied for a job there, I had no idea what that meant. So it had this title, customer service, and it was doing all sorts of things. It was doing things like the customer surveys, mystery shopping. It was doing the performance management that I referred to. and it was doing internal communications. So internal comms wasn't sitting with PR at that time, which was much more established, PR and media relations. It was part of this change world. Now, what happened subsequently, I don't know, but certainly this was all of, yeah, this was the main internal comms team for NatWest UK. Not necessarily, you know, this didn't get into the like the investment bank or anything. This was the UK bank, which was the biggest part, with all the branches and all the people. But it was very much part of the change that was going on at that time.
Thank you, Howard. That's just really, really, really useful. I mean, and I think it really is important because again, my sense is that internal comms in the 80s and 90s is growing, but it hadn't yet, I don't know, institutionalized. I hadn't found a place. It was in all these different locations, but it seemed to be like a period of creativity, as you were saying. Can we now go? So you leave NatWest in the mid 90s, is that
Yes.
is that right?
90,
And then
96, yeah.
the 90s, sorry, the 90s. And then you went to Deco and Eversheds. Is that right?
Just before, so I had 3 years. I left NatWest, and actually, having been making videos from an in-house perspective, I actually went to a production company first.
Oh, interesting.
So I spent 3 years making videos for other companies. So actually, so to your question around, where the sort of the things that it's interesting when I think back of some of the videos that we were making for different types of clients. Because there was the sort of standard internal comms thing or the standard CEO type thing, but there was also training. There was also other very interesting sorts of things that were going on at that time. Yeah, there was a lot of video. There was a lot of internal comm stuff, that we were doing. It was all, video was being used a lot, and that was a really interesting sort of creative 3 years. And it's also interesting because you sort of had you stood across two different worlds. You stood across the sort of creative world, which I would argue, and creative people I know in the sort of film world would probably might disagree with me, but I would argue there was the old-fashioned, we're making this, we've got to make it on film, we've got to do, sort of, it's got to be perfect quality, had big crews, the budgets you could command for corporate video then, and not, when I say for corporate video, I just mean for run-of-the-mill programs were nothing like, we're sort of so much higher than probably they are today. You turn up with a crew of 6, 8, 10 people, depending on the shoot. It would be a big deal. Whereas these days, it's obviously nothing like it, and budgets are, completely different situation now. And of course, that it's easy to sort of get caught up in that. We've got to have the best quality film on this stock. But then you sort of remind people, but ultimately we're going to copy it like thousands of times, and it's going to go on VHS and sent and be watched on VHS, and to a bunch of people who really are not going to tell the quality difference. Oh, but they will. So it's really interesting, sort of standing across, trying to bring, maybe as I try and do today, that sort of knowledge of working in house and how, the practical application of some of this stuff. So talking to people who was probably spending more time working for the BBC on a drama, and then sort of increasingly doing a bit of corporate work because it paid better.
Yes, and that's. But do you know what, that narrative you're saying there, which is fascinating, is one that we've heard with the older form, the older channel of internal comms, and even before, of course, company magazines. And it's the same story that a lot of people who went into internal comms, who started working on magazines, were actually journalists, but then actually went into companies because it just paid much more. It was, and there were just much more resources available to do more things. Would it be fair to say that?
Yeah, definitely. There were more. You could absolutely see there was this sort of movement of people who were steeped in drama, in film, in creative art, if you like, who could see a better payday. And this is not me I'm not in any way being critical of this. Why not? But they could see more steady work, more chance to earn better money by doing corporate stuff, and became sort of corporate just directing corporate stuff rather than hoping to direct the next, drama or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating, and it goes back to one of the kind of almost theories we had when we began this history project, that what happens, how you're seeing it, internal comms developing, is it's actually taking media from its broader social media environment, if that makes sense. So, company magazines are taken from the magazine newspaper environment. Videos are taken from TV film production. And I think it is. On the one hand, you could say, well, this isn't a very ethical thing to do, but I think on the other hand, it's not. It's an organised saying we belong to society. We look like society. It legitimates that. What was the
We
company, by the way, you
Oh, it's a
worked
company
with?
called a company not there anymore. I mean, it was called Oriel, but it doesn't exist anymore. But we won an award. I can't remember this while I was still at NatWest or when NatWest became a client after I left. But we won an award by, in essence, doing a corporate version of the Stepford Wives.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was all to do, if I remember rightly, this is a long time ago, but it was all to do with training around answering phones, and giving great service when you're answering phones, rather than a sort of Stepford wife thing where it was just poor service, or whatever it was. Doesn't sound, I'm not describing it very well. I haven't seen the program in 30 years, but that we had that creativity to do drama and to tackle a story in a very different way, which I don't know whether you'd have that freedom today.
No, and do you know what though? I mean, I've heard this. I mean, it was interesting. I was at the Institute of Internal Comms Research Festival, and it was a great. I forget the lady who did it, but really brilliant one on storytelling, organizational. And she did the same thing. She actually said, a lot of our content was actually based on just really trending TV shows, and in your book, leading leading the listening organization, there's a bit in there where you talk about, I think it was a Canadian internal comms who based a listening exercise on Dragon's Den, and
Yeah.
so again, that's fascinating that we're seeing here over the space of 30 years and maybe more, a lot of content is actually mirroring, it's reflecting what's going on in the broader popular cultural media background.
Well, I think that there's and you do see that today, and you see people who have the ability to be creative, to have fun in a really positive sense, have fun, to do something and recognize that if people enjoy doing it, they're likely to want to do a bit more of it. And I've been lucky enough to do that in my career a few times. And if I think about, you mentioned Eversheds, in a law firm environment, we were able to introduce a sort of a conversation based program, and we called it Have Your Say. And basically, we were able to take people for, let's say, an hour every quarter and have a topic that they could discuss, and we would collect the feedback, and we had a right process around it. And I had brilliant leadership support, so that even in this sort of world of fee earning lawyers, that they were encouraged to come to this, which was obviously not a fee earning hour, and it was very successful for us. But we had fun because once I remember we did something we called Have Your Say at the Movies. And so we made a bunch of films, but we served popcorn and ice cream and just tried to make it more relaxed and, almost like a movie experience, albeit it was to have a discussion about one or two sort of topics. And so you had, where you've got the ability to think broadly, and leadership
Mm,
who are up for it and trust you. I mean, that's so important. And so if
yeah.
you recommend something, they're not looking to say, well, I don't know. They'll actually say, yeah, you're the guy who we brought in to do this. It's working. So if you're suggesting it, yeah, we'll go with it. And I think sometimes, sort of using popular culture even today is very important, because people
Yes.
they understand what they're being asked. They understand, what the deal is, and if there is a level of trust and a level of support, then you can get great results from these things.
No, I think it's fascinating. Thank you. I think it's really, really useful. Can we expand on that? So,
Mm,
Eversheds was a law firm.
mm.
Can you just give us when were you working at Eversheds? When were you doing internal comms there?
Yeah. So I went to Adecco first for about 18 months. So Adecco High Street Recruitment business, one of the global big recruitment
Yeah.
players. I was
Yeah. Yeah.
in the UK. They were formerly Alfred Marks, and so I was their first internal comms person. So that was interesting because it was, again, the comms there. It was a lot around recognition and rewards. So highly competitive, short-term sales environment, and it, again, from a comms professional perspective, understanding that environment, very different to the bank, very different to other places I might have been. But once you understood it, trying to provide comms which were, sort of supported the culture and helped. So we were trying to use recognition to tell stories of, what it looked like and felt like to be winners. So we created a new magazine, I would say, on the basis of the recognition program. And every quarter we would say, this is how this branch has turned itself around, or this is how this branch has been the winner in its sort of in its area. And we would talk to the individuals involved. They'd all tell much the same story. There was nothing particularly new, but we were trying to say, look, let's use this recognition program as a way of telling the stories about what good looks like in our organization. I was there 18 months, and then I went to Evershed. So Evershed's, by number of people, I think at that time was the biggest law firm certainly in the UK. It had been the merger of I think it was 7 regional firms into one firm previous year before. So I think these days it's still one of the big firms in the world. So it's a new sort of style of law firm, which was challenging the old Magic Circle law firms,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yes.
was, sort of coming out of a lot of, regional routes, although, successful London office too. And again, first internal comms person. So I really like that sort of sense of being the first person to build the function, to start from scratch, to have, where leaders are saying, we need something, and help us to, build this culture, build the comms effort, and great support from leaders to do that. So again, there, very different culture, because you've got fee payers, but what has always been the same, Michael, in all of the jobs I've done where they've been really successful, is great leadership. And I work with 2, call them CEOs, managing partners, same thing in the law world, and who got it, who understood, even in the environment of fee earners, and at times, long hours and corporate law, or litigate, or whatever it was, property law, whatever. In all these different offices, that we were successful because of our people, and so I had great support to do the things that I thought were needed.
Yeah, and that to me, but please do correct me if I'm wrong. That I think sounds quite different from the bank. This is more like a HR approach, or an organizational approach to internal comms. Would it be fair to say that, or?
Yeah, I'm sort of. I think I actually sat in the marketing department, or not the HR department, but I wasn't really doing marketing at all. But I think it
Yeah,
was. I
yeah.
think the approach was, the first guy I worked with, is a guy called David Ansbro, and just a lovely, lovely individual. And he just said, we will only win, we'll only be successful if our people, understand what they're being asked. And so it was a people centric sort of, which aligned with my own beliefs. And so it didn't really matter where I sat.
No, it
And
didn't
I
matter.
had,
No,
and
no.
what I think, wherever you sit as a comms person, HR is a, if not the key relationship, it's a key relationship.
I
It
think
doesn't
so.
matter
Yeah.
if you're in HR or not in HR, but I work very closely with them.
Yeah, and no, again, it's for me, looking at the broader history of internal comms, it's a fascinating, because I mean, you don't have this ambiguity with somewhere like marketing. When marketing historically developed, it was in advertising or sales or marketing. When HR developed, it was, in the older industrial relations, it was there. But the fascinating thing about the history of IC is it hasn't had that clarity. I mean, it's not a criticism. It might be something which has led to a lot of its creativity. But where does it sit? Is it in HR? Is it in senior management? Is it in marketing? It
Yeah.
comes. Just
What
one
what
question.
what was just
Sorry.
just one thing on that? What was interesting, as we talk about it, it comes back to me now, is that one of the reasons I was placed in marketing in that world was that the marketeers themselves in each of the offices, so in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Newcastle, and so on, in Paris, their role was a really difficult role because they were there to do, sort of marketing efforts and not business development. There was a split between marketing and business development, but the marketeers were there to do, on the one hand, marketing, on the second hand, external comms, media all locally, working with the sort of central PR team. And then thirdly, on the third hand, if you can have three hands, they were there to do internal comms as well in their local offices or in their practice areas. And so they were, that's quite a schizophrenic role.
Wow.
So that was sort of out of marketing. You were doing marketing, PR, and internal comms. And so for me, I had this group of people, as did the PR manager, who you would try to work through to deliver locally. And I was quite a heavy user of these people. So I think that they were really tough roles because they were just pulled in every direction.
Thank you. No, that absolutely fascinating, and definitely, I mean, without going too technical, if you look at service marketing, it has 7 P's rather than 4 P's, and one of those extra P's is people. If you are selling a service, it's people who deliver. So there's an inherent relationship between marketing and HR and IC. They kind of all link up together. Just one other question before we leave this and really go to the last part, which for me is really interesting, is your book in this whole question of listening and IC, is how common was this? I mean, we know that in the 1980s and 1990s there was a lot of organizational reorganization, and lots of mergers. Organizations were changing, and either changing what the organization was or creating new organizations. Diageo, for example, bringing together 2 huge companies, Guinness and Metropolitan, and creating a new. To what extent was going on at Eversheds? Was that common elsewhere, that you would bring in internal comms, as an agent of change management, of facilitating? Was this at this stage? This would have been, I imagine, the mid-late 90s. Was this common? Was this common, or was this a new thing?
Yeah, so this was the early years into the 2000s. So this
early
is
2000s. Sorry.
Yeah, I joined there 2001. I think, well, this is the one bit that sounds a bit arrogant, but we were way ahead. Whereas I can't say that at my NatWest days, I can certainly say at Eversheds. Yeah, I remember they had these legal marketing awards, and I won the comms award 2 years running, internal comms award 2 years running. And, we got together through some legal services marketing group, sort of an internal comms networking group. And I think we were way ahead of what the other law firms were doing at that point. I mean, way ahead. And partly because in some of the law firms, what I call them, the magic circle firms, the really big firms in London, doing the big work, that was still quite old-fashioned, partner-dominated. You didn't have the sort of conversations going on that we had. But we wanted to take a sort of a different approach. We wanted to be the new kid on the block doing things differently, and we had the scale to be able to do it as well. And I think for those years, I was there something like 2001 till 7, something like that. And I think we were setting the pace in the law firm world, and maybe to some extent in professional services, because when I would meet with people from like the big accounting firms, I'm not sure that, whilst they had more resources and they were doing different things, I'm not sure that some of the things that we were doing still weren't maybe pushing the boundaries further than where a lot of the professional services people were. When I sort of think about my career, and I stepping up True 2.5 years ago, there's always been the thought that maybe the time to set up a business was when I left Eversheds, because professional services, nothing was happening in that way, and maybe a missed opportunity. But you never know that until afterwards.
Never have regrets. Never say never. So
not at all.
Not absolutely, and obviously you've been hugely successful since. So so really, what you're saying in a nutshell, then, is this is an example of how internal comms can provide strategic advantage. Is that right? That the fact that Eversheds was doing this, but other people, this is a key competitive advantage. It's something where IC is definitely demonstrating its value.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, that really aligns with how I see internal comms. So to find a business and find leaders who believe that and who were willing to do things differently. I mean, some of the partner conferences that we did, I remember a video we did I was really proud of, because I'd seen something at the Oscar ceremony, actually, just like some film stars talking about why film is so important, and they one of these sort of things they play at the very beginning. I thought, yeah, we could do something like that, and we made this film about why Eversheds was added, and I just so we could be creative, but with a view to building a culture to be different. And I think that when you get leaders who say, yes, I understand if I get my people right, I can have a competitive advantage, then the work we're doing as internal comms is a huge part of that. It's not the only thing at all. You need the processes, you need the systems, you need managers and leaders to follow that as well. But you need a lot of things. But the comms plays a really important role in helping to to develop that culture. And I was lucky to work in that environment where, even though it was a law firm, and a lot of people might have thought there's no way that you're going to get that in a law firm. And I'll tell you again, just from the history perspective, I think is I got this job because I saw it advertised in the Guardian. Some people old enough will remember the Guardian used to, on a Monday, have a media supplement which had a pages of jobs at the back. I mean, can you even imagine these days applying for a job out of a newspaper? And so I just had no idea what I was walking into, except I'd had a couple of law firm interviews, because I think the recruiters at the time thought maybe I had worked in banking, so that was a place I could go. And I thought, I don't want to work in this world. I don't want to work in that sort of hierarchical, really staid environment, which old-fashioned law firms were, and we were very different, and it was a belief in people. Yeah, definitely.
Fascinating. And really, just for the last 10 minutes, this really does bring us now on to, I think it's a great way to come into this, is to the book, and clearly this links with the company that you now run with Anne-Marie of True, because it's about change management, and I think it's a fascinating book. So just so for the listeners, this is the book, leading the listening organization. This is the book here, so we can see, written with Mike Pounsford and Kevin Ruck. Kevin is an incredible academic, and I see some of his papers on employee voice, social justice, absolutely fantastic. So really, what is at the heart of this book is that organisations, to communicate, need to speak, but also need to listen, right? And so really, why is listening so important in internal communication? And particularly, what you say in the book as well is it's not simply listening as I'm listening to you. It's a type of listening as well. So can you?
Yeah. So I define listening as sort of there's sort of this what when you ask most organizations what listening do you do, they say we do a survey. Maybe we got some networks. And actually what they do hearing, in my in the way I think about it, they do hearing. So voices are coming one way. What makes hearing into listening is what I call you respond appropriately. So there needs to be a respond element to it. You need to do something with what you hear. And actually, when you think about we start listening from when we are very, very small babies, and it's a natural human thing. And we all know that when we, in our personal lives, every single day that we're alive, when we've got something to say to someone, we know whether they're listening or not. We know whether they're on their phone. We know whether they're thinking about something else, or we know that they've really listened to us. And we also know how that makes us feel. So if you feel that you've got, you go and see your boss and you've got this idea and you say, I really want to do something this way, and they work with you to support you and give you maybe a couple of pointers and set you on your way, you feel great about that. You feel valued, you feel excited, you come in and it's been a really good conversation. You know that if they've not really taken any notice, maybe they're thinking of their next meeting, you feel you're not valued, you feel angry, you feel irritated, or so the organization listening to you is the same thing, I think. And I think in these days today, where change is just an increasing, presence, it's a never-ending change that is going on in businesses. Year after year, many changes happening at the same time. If that the assumption that so many organizations have made in the past, which is we just, I use the phrase a lot, Michael, that internal comms has won some battles, but it's losing the war. One of the ways I mean this, we win a battle because now a lot of, even down to relatively small, medium-sized businesses will employ a communications person. And so we've got change coming. We'll tell people there's a change. We'll do a town hall, we'll do a CEO email, we'll do an article in the newsletter, and then we assume that they've got it and they will change because they've got it. And that's not how we are, how we react as people. The changes we deal with across our lives all the time, we need to understand them. We need to understand, why is it happening? What does it mean to me? How do I navigate through this change? And that could be, I often tell a story about just going to the gym and they change the equipment to something more modern with better shiny screens and all this sort of thing and more use of video. And you can understand in a sense why they made the change, but now all of my routines and the things that I took for granted have disappeared. It's a bit irritating. So when you magnify that at corporate level, we have questions, we have concerns, we have suggestions, and we need to be able to sort of have the conversations that allow us to say, I get why the change, not only why the change is happening, but what it means to me, how it's going to affect me and my colleagues, and maybe reporting lines are changing, or maybe we're going down one process rather than multiple processes for something, I don't know, whatever it might be, new technology, new systems, so on. Change is happening all around us, and so it's hard for us to understand what we're meant to be doing. Now, if you believe in a people-centric way of doing things, if you believe that your people can be a competitive advantage, you want to bring them with you through that journey of change. And too many organizations forget that, because they think if we just tell people stuff, they'll just do it. And I think it's McKinsey's, it's quite sort of well-known sort of data, talk about 70% of change transformation programs not delivering what they promised in the business case. And when you think about that, that's a huge amount of money that's being wasted, and time, and not delivering what's promised. Now, and why do they say, what's one of the main reasons for that is because you don't bring your people with you. That's what they say, not what I'm saying. You don't bring your people with you. And you sort of think it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? If we bring our people with us, we're more likely to get to where we need to get to in a more sustainable way. And I think listening and involving people and enabling them to have the conversations which they need to have is just a big part of that. It's a big part of navigating throughout. I don't think that's the only reason. I mean, if I'm presenting about this topic, there's all sorts of reasons why you talk about. We use the term the age of listening. We're moving into this age of listening, and even since the book was published 18 months or so ago, I think in the Gallagher survey earlier this year, the number of they referred to the number of senior comms leaders putting listening in their top 3 was a noticeable, for the first time, it was a number which was worth commenting on. So and the number of people go to events who are talking about listening now is it's on everybody's lips.
So it's had a change. It's had impact, is what you're saying. Yeah?
I think so. I mean, it's not just what we've done, but I just think generally, companies are beginning to say we need to. It's not good enough just to talk about engagement anymore. I'm not sure that engagement matters. And actually, I think listening is more than just around the relationship you have with your employees. Listening, if you were to ask me what's the number one reason to listen, I would say to help leaders make better decisions. It's about risk management. Again, in the UK, if you think about what the post office story that we're all pretty familiar with by now, Mr. Bates, exactly. But what's at the heart of that is an organisation who just decided not to listen. They were being told all this stuff, and they said, no, we're going to put our fingers in our ear and we're not going to listen to it. I think that boils it down very simplistically, but that's what happened. So it's a risk thing. It's about better decision making. It's about change. It's about being close to the customer. There's so many ways that listening helps organizations, and I think that's what we try and get across in the book.
Really, and as I've said, I recommend a lot of people, because I think from a historical perspective, because obviously I'm reading it because I love internal comms, but obviously bringing it from a historical perspective, you get the sense when reading the book that we're entering into a new stage of internal comms. or not that it hasn't happened yet, but there is potential for this or that, and this new stage is very much, the older form of internal comms potentially was about talking. This is now about talking and listening. Would it be fair to say that?
Yeah, I think two things. I think one is that there's always been evidence of listening, and I talked about the hotline stuff 30 years ago. So
Mm, mm,
there's
mm,
always been some elements
mm,
where companies
mm.
listen. There's plenty of for all the surveys that make no difference. There's always surveys that have
Well,
led
yeah,
to change,
yeah, yeah.
and
That's
where
right. Yeah,
people have. So we
yeah.
can't say this is totally new, but I
No,
do think that we are. I do think that we are entering into this period where maybe it's behavioural comms. Maybe we're talking about we need to understand how people act and respond, and then try and create. The word communications itself, internal communications, the word communications may be the misnomer here, and maybe we need a better term, but nevertheless, it's what we've got. And I think that understanding how people react to things and what you need to do to create the right reactions and why, and then putting in the right, the right things which are, which are going to help people to have the right reactions. I think is much more part of is a different time to just telling them stuff.
yes.
And yeah, so but I think to some extent, as a lot of people, me included, for some, you think, isn't it common sense if we want to tell people
No,
stuff
I
that
know, I know,
we
I
have the
know,
conversation.
I know,
We
I
need
know,
we need
I
more
know.
leaders together.
I just think, I mean, my impression, from having studied really the history of insular comms now for years. I mean, our first paper came out in 2008, I think, and even then, when I was doing my PhD on office workers, I was looking at, how they were interacting. I just get the sense that organisations, I think individuals are quite concerned. Individuals sometimes don't listen. And people can be conservative, and if you put lots of people in an organization, it just amplifies that. It's very difficult to change culture in organizations. It's very intractable. So just so the last question really on, but this is fascinating, and hopefully we could even do another podcast where we talk, because these are huge questions coming up now. And obviously AI is on everyone's mind in social media. Are these new technologies that we're seeing now in the workplace? Because I mean, it is incredible. You can't ignore them. In the past, even in, as you were saying before, in the 80s, 90s, there weren't that many communication channels. There was print, video, some events. That was basically it. All right, computers were, you could do possible messages, but now it's incredible how you can communicate. Do you think this digital transformation is going to have a big impact on a behavioral transformation in communications, on more listening, on more symmetrical two-way conversation? Is that inevitable, or maybe not?
Yeah, look, I think so I think from a positive perspective, we can use these new technologies to help us do more, do it quicker. Um, AI can help in so many ways, clearly. So from a listening perspective, it can help us to listen better. Anyone, and a very easy example is that anyone who's ever organized a survey before, often on the survey, the last question is, tell us in your own words how we can do something better, blah, blah, blah.
Mm,
So if you're in a big organization and you're the person managing this, or even the agency managing this, that you get thousands and thousands of example of ideas that you have to trawl through. Well, of course, you can do that in a second now, just because the AI does it for you, and will give you um, all the stuff you need in terms of what people are saying. So you can do what we call continuous listening. You can do sentiment analysis in a very different way to the way that you've been able to do it. And some organizations that now in the US and probably here too are doing things like, hopefully telling people they're doing this, but they're almost like, I guess the term is scraping some of the data that exists in the organization, some of the conversations that are taking place, maybe through channels like Viva Engage or similar, to understand, what people are saying and thinking, and how they might respond to that. So, we can use that in a very different way. And I'm looking at all sorts, I'm working with somebody at the moment around how we can use AI to listen, to make listening that much better. And for example, and I'm really intrigued, I haven't actually done this, but I've seen it, and I think it's really interesting, is if you're beginning a change, you historically, maybe you get focus groups together, talk to people. Nowadays, with AI, you can create online personas. You can basically run an online focus group with these online personas,
incredible.
and
incredible.
it's not going to give
Incredible.
you the answers, but it
No.
gives you a head start. It gives you something that you wouldn't have had before. But the key thing here, and I know, you know, I'm not alone in this, but is you've got to have the human side of it. You've got to, you know, so take what AI is telling you and humanize
Yeah.
it and make
Yeah.
it work. And I think, you know, recognizing where AI can help. Obviously, it can help in things like content creation. But if all you do is say, I don't need the communications person anymore
Yeah.
because
No.
I'm just going to get my stuff
No.
from AI,
No.
then you'll definitely
No.
lose something very important. I was reading last week about certain, you know, technology companies where the CEO is now that has almost like an avatar or, you know, AI hologram sort of image or whatever the phrase is, you know, who's able to give their message in multiple languages according to the different offices. So you can, you know, what you can do is only going to get different
It's
and
incredible.
better. But
That's-
I think if you lose that ability to understand people
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
say we're going
Yeah.
to cut costs
Yeah.
and we're just going
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
the AI to do it, that's not going to work so well.
Thank you so much, Hal. That's a brilliant way to end this. So I'd just like to say thank you so much for
Pleasure.
taking part in this. It was really, I think, a brilliant combination of the historical, your experience, and the future. Thank you so much.